In 2004, the Center for International Law was founded to fill in a vacuum in the Philippines. This vacuum was the lack of a civil society organization that would promote the binding nature of international law in the Philippines. International law is a very broad field. The founders of Center Law felt that there was a need for an organization that would provoke both jurisprudence and legislation, strengthening the applicability of international law in the country. This has led to the many test cases to be filed in the country. An offense-defense strategy of suing the former first gentleman for indiscriminate filing of libel suits against an unprecedented number of journalists in the country, filing a petition that was sought to declare as unconstitutional the declaration of a state of emergency, which led to the exercise of powers that could only be exercised in times of martial law, and a damage suit against the police for apprehending journalists who were then just doing their jobs covering a press conference of a then detained senator at Manila Peninsula. It was in this context that resort to an international human rights mechanism, the Human Rights Committee, was had in the name of the Davao-based journalist accused by Davao representative and former Speaker Prospero Nograles of libel. Center Law learned about the fate of Alexander Adonis from the NUJP when Faraan casually mentioned it to me after Center Law had conducted a training on the effective investigation and prosecution of extralegal killings in Davao City. The idea to resort to the HRC had its roots in the fact that the Supreme Court had repeatedly ruled that our country's criminal law was constitutional, even if the courts have sanctioned it to muzzle freedom of the press. Had it been otherwise, no journalist in fact should be accused of and more so convicted of libel given the concept of a public figure and the qualified privilege accorded to any report or opinion on a matter involving public interest. But as the painful experience of Alex Adonis has shown, our courts very seldom applied the letter intent of the law correctly. Alexis Adonis was accused, convicted, and served 2 years of a 4-year term of imprisonment when he signed the communication entitled Alexis Adonis versus Republic of the Philippines. The venue of the petition was the UN Human Rights Committee, a body composed of experts, and created by the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR. Its jurisdiction had to be specifically recognized by states through their ratification of the optional protocol. Fortunately, President Corazon Aquino facilitated this in 1986 when the Philippines signed the ICCPR. Adonis was found guilty of libel for reporting that ex-Speaker Nograles was seen running in a state of naked glory off a corridor of a Makati hotel after he had been caught in the act by the husband of the married woman he had allegedly spent the night with. This is why Representative Nograles has been referred to as Mr. Burlesque King. While Alex Adonis reported in his radio program in Davao City this story, which was published in Avante, he gave a clue as to the identity of the congressman, who was not named by the tabloid, but only after he had verification of his identity, not only from an eyewitness to the incident, but also from an NBI agent who was on the scene and related by blood to the woman's husband. What probably enraged the speaker was probably not the report of the extramarital affair, because that in fact is a Medal of Honor in Trapos in this country, but in his reenactment, Adonis acted out something from the woman's husband was, quote, removed, cut, and forced into the mouth, unquote. This was how we translated the narration in Visayan to English. Adonis, shortly after the speaker complained, was transferred by his station to Cagayan de Oro. While there, he assumed that the lawyer hired by his station to defend him was in fact doing all he can to keep him a free man. Apparently not. Without him knowing it, this lawyer withdrew from the case without informing Adonis and left him with no counsel. He was later declared by the court to have absconded, and evidence was received against him ex parte in Davao City, the bailiwick of the ex-speaker. Naturally, Adonis was convicted, and he knew about it only when he was arrested to serve his sentence. In his communication to the UNHRC, Adonis argued that criminal libel is not a reasonable restriction because under the revised penal code, truth is not a complete defense. He also argued that the penalty is not proportional to the aim which the law possess, the protection of the privacy of private individuals, since there is an alternative sanction in the form of civil libel. Article 19, Section 3 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights states, and I quote, "The exercise of rights are subject to restrictions, but these shall be provided by law and are necessary, A, for respect for the rights of others, B, protection of national security, or of public order." The Human Rights Committee, after almost 3 long years, agreed with Adonis. In its view, the committee ruled that Philippine criminal libel law was contrary to Article 19 of the ICCPR, or freedom of expression. In so declaring, the UNHRC, in the absence of the President, relied on its General Commentary number 34. And I quote, General Comment 34, which states, defamation laws must be crafted, this is the UNHRC speaking. Defamation laws must be crafted with care to ensure that they do not stifle freedom of expression. All such laws should include such defenses, such as defense of truth, and it should not be applied with regard to those forms of expression that are not of their nature subject to verification. At least with regard to comments about public figures, consideration should be given to avoiding penalizing or otherwise rendering unlawful and untrue statements that have been published in error but without malice. In any event, a public interest in the subject matter of the criticism should be recognized as a defense. Care should be taken to avoid excessively punitive measures and penalties. State parties should consider the decriminalization of defamation. The committee ordered the Philippine government to provide Adonis with an effective remedy, including adequate compensation for the time served in prison. The UN body, the UNHRC, also declared that the Philippines is also under an obligation to take steps to prevent similar violations in the future, including by reviewing the relevant libel legislation. There were 2 dissenting opinions to the view that was expressed by the UNHRC majority. This was not because the dissenters thought the decision to be wrong, but rather they wanted the view to be more categorical about what the Philippine government should do with its libel law. In his dissenting opinion, Professor Salvioli declared, in the case at hand, the committee has missed a clear opportunity expressly and unambiguously to indicate to the state party, the Philippines, that it must change its criminal law on defamation to make it compatible with the covenant. Another member of the committee stated in her, or in his dissenting opinion, moreover, I quote, Raj Sumer Lalla echoed the dissent of Professor Savioli.